Our defense team firmly, and I mean firmly, believes in Mr. Kohberger's innocence.
Bryan Kohberger, accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students. The case seems to be moving painstakingly slow. But what's happening behind the scenes, and what are the biggest questions that remain? We'll discuss in this episode of Entin Across America. Hey everybody, this is Brian. Thanks for listening to this podcast. I'm actually in the car right now in between stories. I've been in the car and in airplanes a lot on the road pretty much every week this year for NewsNation. Spent the last 2 weeks or so in Pennsylvania covering the attempted assassination of former President Trump. But a lot of the places I go, people want to talk about the true crime cases that I cover, especially the Bryan Kohberger case. So I wanted to answer the top 5 questions I get when it comes to the Kohberger case. Question 1, when is the trial going to be? That one is easy. The answer is June 2nd, 2025. For a long time, we didn't know the answer. There was no trial date. Now there is a trial date. It's about a year from now. We're told the trial is going to take 3 months, so it's going to be a long trial. The judge says 3 months. That will include jury selection, the trial itself, and then also the sentencing phase. Question 2 I get a lot, could there be a plea deal? So that's an interesting question. Right now, there's no indication that there's a plea deal on the table, although I will say with other cases that I've covered, a plea deal, discussions about a plea deal normally won't come till closer to the trial, which in this case is about a year out. But no indication of a plea deal right now. Normally, when there's discussions about a plea deal, victims' family members will be brought in to be a part of the discussions. And in this case, a plea deal would most likely or obviously involve death being taken off the table. Victim Kaylee Goncalves, I spoke to her family. They are against a plea deal. They want the death penalty. This is what they've told me in the past.
If he pled guilty and said, I'll plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence, have you thought about that?
Yeah, I don't want that because I do know, I studied the criminal system and the difference between life in prison. Even if it's 20, 30 years, he's 23 hours locked up. He doesn't get to do what is it, BTK?
BTK killer?
PTK.
Or whatever.
We've found out that he writes papers for other prisoners and gets treated really well because he's intelligent and he's able to help other prisoners get preferential treatment through the legal system. We don't want that type of behavior to happen in our case where he has influence outside of this event. So
that's been a hard one, though. I mean,
he could write a book, he can do things. Idaho doesn't have a law particular that protects against that.
The hard thing with that question, honestly, is that's where you forget, and I don't know how it's possible, but you forget that there's 3 other families involved here. We're not the only ones. You know, it's not just, I'm like, this is not a one
crime fits all.
This is,
right.
This isn't just our daughter.
Right, some
and
might
I know
not
that
want to go through the trial.
I know some of the other families definitely would be, yes, like, let's go. Where do I sign? And I understand that. 100%. 100% I understand that. But you know what? Ultimately, it's not our call. I mean, they might ask us our opinion like they did on the death penalty, and we'll give it. But just because, our opinion is yay or nay doesn't mean that, that's what we get.
Another interesting point to make when you talk about a possible plea deal is the fact that Bryan Kohberger's attorney, Ann Taylor, has been very, very passionate that Kohberger is innocent. She's been more passionate, I would say, than lawyers in other murder trials that I've covered in terms of when she talks about her client's innocence. Especially, she said something especially interesting at a hearing that I was covering back in April. Take a listen.
For the court to allow the prosecutor to say, we need to keep this all private for a fair trial, really ignores the public nature of this case. It really ignores the fact that Brian has been essentially convicted in the media. You don't have to read but a few articles to see how negative they are about him. He has a right to have this information withheld, brought out in public, so that people can see it's not this neat little package. So people can start to wonder if Brian's innocent. Your Honor, Brian is innocent. And he has an absolute Sixth Amendment right to have his hearings in public.
Our defense team firmly, and I mean firmly, believes in Mr. Kohberger's innocence. And right now he's being held to have a trial in a county that believes that he is guilty. In this country, we pride ourselves on a jury system that doesn't stand for that.
So the reason I think that's important, again, it just goes back to this plea deal question. There's no feeling right now like those negotiations are happening behind the scenes. I mean, the feeling is that Ann Taylor, the defense, wants to go to trial. They want to prove that Bryan Kohberger is innocent. And again, on the prosecution side, also haven't heard any rumblings about a plea deal at this point, but we'll see what happens as we get closer to the trial. Question 3 that I get a lot: do Bryan Kohberger's parents support him? I have sources who tell me that Bryan Kohberger's parents do support him. I can't speak for his extended family or siblings, but I am told that his parents do talk to him regularly on the phone in the jail in Latah County, that there was a plan to visit him, that they were going to visit him in person this summer, which they haven't visited as of yet that I know of, and I'm not sure if that plan is coming to fruition. But bottom line, I am told that his parents do still support him. Question 4, did Bryan Kohberger know or stalk any of the victims? This is something that has come up again and again. There's been some other people who have reported on it. There's been a lot of rumors. I personally, and I've been covering this since the beginning, have not come up with any evidence that shows that Bryan Kohberger knew any of the victims or stalked any of the victims. I did talk to Kaylee Goncalves' parents several times about it, and they said that Kaylee was afraid of a stalker and that she talked about that, but nothing specifically tying Kohberger to Kaylee or any of the other victims. And interestingly, also, about a month or so, I think, after the murders, I was in Moscow and I interviewed the manager of a vape store near where the victims lived who knew them, who did say that Kaylee was being stalked or followed. No connection to Bryan Kohberger that he knew of, but he did say that she talked about being stalked, which I thought was interesting. If you didn't see the interview initially, take a listen to this.
One of them more or less openly says, oh yeah, we've had a friend of ours be stalked before, so this is kind of why we all travel in a group like this. And just was
it Kaylee who said that? Do you remember?
No, it was Maddie who actually said that. So Maddie said it, and it was kind of like more mentioning, like motioning to Kaylee too, like who was right next to her. So you could tell that like they obviously all were trying to keep Kaylee safe, you know, and to be there for her as good friends. And then yeah, to know that a few weeks later, now I won't see them, you know, anymore, anything like that. So it's crazy.
How long before the murder about was that?
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
3 weeks beforehand, because I was telling them I hope they had a good Thanksgiving break and everything like that too, because I didn't know if I'd see them again. So, because with a lot of the times with the kids, with the way after the pandemic, some of the kids leave in waves. So I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to see you this weekend or not. Hey, hope you have a great, you know, Thanksgiving with your family. And that was the last I saw them.
Did they elaborate any more on the stalker comment?
They more or less kept making the comment that it always seemed to happen either by the campus or down on Main Street. And the last time the Kaylee more or less made it sound like it seemed like it was down on Main Street and that the person was coming from like around the Corner Club area, and then like as far as I remember, it's the guy who ended up like trying to go and talk to her, and then he gave up on it and he ended up walking away. So she thought she was being stalked up to a certain point, and then looked behind her and he was no longer behind her. So
I just want to make sure that I get it right. So
yeah.
Just tell me again exactly what you remember.
Just more or less, I made a joke about them being in a group, and they just said, yeah, you know, one of our friends and motioning to Kaylee that she'd been stalked recently, and so that had people constantly following her around. And it's not just a one-off thing, that this is apparently something that Kaylee had tons of issues with. That apparently she always had somebody who's constantly walking behind her like that.
So he said that, but I've never had any reporting or hard evidence that Bryan Kohberger was actually stalking Kaylee or any of the victims, or that he knew or followed them on social media. I know there's been other reporting out there. None of it has ever really come from me. I've never been able to nail that down. And it's interesting, at one of the recent court hearings, they were actually questioning one of the defense experts who was doing this jury survey, which I'll get to more in a minute. And it came up that the prosecution said that Bryan Kohberger did not know or stalk the victims. Listen to this little piece from court.
You acknowledge false that Mr. Kohberger allegedly stalked one of the victims. That's false. You know that to be false.
Which one?
That Mr. Kohberger allegedly stalked one of the victims.
Yes, I was trying not to say that because.
But you knew that was false.
I did.
Yes. And so you have now, for anybody who had never heard that before, that question is now planted into them, unqualified representation that Mr. Kohberger stalked one of the witnesses, and that's false.
That's false. Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you, okay, all right.
Okay, so prosecution says that Bryan Kohberger wasn't stalking one of the victims. The probable cause affidavit in this case, which is pretty much all we know officially because of the gag order, is pretty basic in some ways. So I think that this is one of those questions where we may learn more at trial. I mean, this is the kind of thing maybe they'll elaborate on some of this at trial, but for now, again, no evidence. Question 5 I get a lot is, where is the trial going to be? You'd think that would be an easy answer, that it would be where the murders happened, in Moscow, Idaho, in Latah County. But Bryan Kohberger's defense team is asking for a change of venue. They want the trial moved. They do not feel that Bryan Kohberger can get a fair trial in Moscow, Idaho. They think it's too small of an area, and that the jury pool has been tainted because they think that everybody knows about the case and that they've already formed opinions. This is a big topic right now because there's going to be a hearing at the end of August that I'm going to go to, where they're going to talk about this change of venue and the defense's request for a change of venue. And they've already filed a motion about it. And I want to read you part of what the defense said. They said, Mr. Kohberger is protected under the Constitution of the United States and the state of Idaho. His protection to a fair and impartial jury is infringed without a change of venue. A fair and impartial jury cannot be found in Latah County because of the extensive publicity that is ongoing and inflammatory. The inflammatory nature of the publicity has included inaccurate information and inadmissible information. The publicity has been extremely pervasive in the small community of Latah County. Remediation, such as enlarging the jury pool, will not cure the problem. And they actually did this survey, the defense, where they hired an expert to call people in Latah County to find out what they knew about the case. And in their filing, they said, the community attitude survey, that's what they called it, shows case recognition is 98%. 70% of those recognizing the case have already formed an opinion regarding Mr. Kohberger. Their opinion is that he is guilty. The survey shows that of those that have the opinion Mr. Kohberger is guilty, 51% state they have a fixed opinion. That means there is nothing that will change their opinion. And they go on to say, it is noteworthy that outside of Latah County, the incidence of fear associated with the case is significantly reduced. So they are pushing for the trial to be moved. I spoke to one of our NewsNation senior producers, Allison Winer is her name. She's also an attorney. She's been covering the Kohberger case with me really since the beginning. I wanted to kind of go deeper on this issue because it's so current right now with the hearing coming up at the end of the month. Take a listen. So Allison, what do you think about this argument that the trial should be moved? I mean, do you think it's a good one?
I think it's a pro forma argument. Of course, we were expecting that there was going to be an argument for a change of venue. And that's no surprise there, no surprise in the cases that they cited. The difference here is that in their argument, in the defense argument, besides the statistics, which are coming from people that are hired by the defense, we should keep that in mind. But besides the statistics, they're saying that the publicity has been inaccurate, that there are facts that are getting out there that are not accurate, and also the notion that it is so pervasive. It is a very small place. And I thought that was somewhat persuasive. But we've got to keep in mind that even though they cite that that the media is getting so many things, or so these inaccuracies, there's not a single example cited in this motion that speaks to something that was inaccurately reported. So I'm waiting to see what that's going to be, and then maybe that comes up in argument when we go to court and they argue this motion, and we haven't seen the response from the state yet either.
Yeah, it's interesting. They talk a lot about the media coverage in their argument to have the case moved, saying that basically Latah County has just been inundated with stories about the Kohberger case. But when I've interviewed Kaylee Goncalves' family, her dad actually said to me, I think it would be good in Latah because if you go outside the city of Moscow, there's farmers, it's a rural area, people who don't really watch the news.
I don't know. In the defense's motion here, we have statistics that are a little troubling. A population of 41,000. Eligible population of jurors is 38%, which means a total of 25,000 people. That's not very many people. And the saturation of who knows about the case. But the other statistic, if these statistics are correct, and I'm sure that the state will have their own experts that say exactly the opposite, but if these statistics are correct, or the judge believes they're correct, then we're going to see a group of people that are biased, that already have made up their minds, not only that he's guilty, this is what the defense argued, but that he should get capital punishment. And that's a little disturbing. If that's true, that so many people in this county have already decided that he's guilty, including people in positions of authority, which that was also very troubling.
The prosecution hasn't officially filed yet or said what they feel about this, but I've been at other hearings where they've essentially said they don't want to move the trial. The filing hasn't been made yet.
And the judge doesn't really want to move the
trial. It doesn't
trial.
seem
He
like
said
the
that
judge
too.
does either.
Yeah.
Why do you think, is it better for the prosecution if it stays? Does it matter, do you think?
I think it matters if these statistics are correct. It matters that they'll be getting a bunch of people saying, basically, I can keep an open mind when they can't. The other thing that we didn't touch on, I just said people in authority. The mayor of this town was involved in the fear following the murders, talking about everybody being safe. There was a pervasive fear. You were there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of lingering feelings about what happened. People didn't forget in that town what it was like to be there before he was caught. And when he was caught, there was this immense relief. So there is a pervasive feeling that he's guilty when you talk to people.
But even if people had a fear, and even if they've heard about the case, and even if they've read articles, but then they come in and they're selected as a potential juror and they say, okay, but I can start fresh now and I can look at this with a fresh set of eyes and be non-biased and just listen to what is told to me in court. Isn't that good? Can't you go into it knowing about it but still be a good juror?
You certainly can go into it knowing about it. The fact that if you're going to be unbiased, it's going to require what they call kind of intensive voir dire. And that's when you ask questions of the jury. The judge lets you go beyond sort of the minimal jury questionnaire. And they've done that in other high-profile cases. I'd be skeptical because this is such a small population. And a lot of people are associated with the University of Idaho, which is where, the students went who were sadly murdered. And they're associated, the police chief was the one giving the information out and claiming that they had arrested the suspect and giving people a sense of, Chief Fry,
right,
giving people a sense that everybody's safe now. And he's supposed to be a witness at the trial. So that already presents a constitutional problem. So there's other issues involved with having things right in that town. While the police chief is dealing and taking care of the jurors, he's getting ready to be a witness. That doesn't work.
If he becomes sheriff, because he's running for sheriff.
If he becomes sheriff.
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
Okay.
But yes, technically what you said is totally true. If they come in and say that they have not formed an opinion, that they can be unbiased, that they will hear the evidence and they will rule based on the evidence. Yes, I'm just curious to see what the state's experts are going to say about statistics in the town, because if it becomes a statistical thing, then it probably stays in Latah.
I also wonder it's already a small town and you've got this telephone survey that the defense hired someone to do. Aren't they just tainting the jury pool even more themselves now by making these calls and saying, hey, what do you know about the case? Did you hear this? Did you hear that?
Probably, but that's a good strategy. Then they can move it to Ada County, and they said, all these people, even when we were surveying them, some people called the police to say, why are these people calling?
We'll talk about that, right? They call, so that when they were doing this telephone survey, the defense, people were even so sketched out by getting the call that they were calling the police. So it is an on-edge.
It's an on-edge community.
Yeah.
Let's be fair. they've been through a lot. And when we come there, they know you. And when you're there and they're comfortable with you and you've been straight up and you've been honest in your reporting, but a lot of people followed people home, harassed people. Their feelings about having to relive this, and remembering that this was a community on edge.
Yeah.
With a horrible murder of 4 kids. It's very disturbing. So yeah, I think it touched everybody in that community, and there were vigils where everybody came together, and the pervasive opinion was, we've got the killer.
Yeah.
He's in jail.
I know that the way the law is set up, that Bryan Kohberger has to get a fair case, and that's
Sixth Amendment.
Yeah, that's the way it works. And he's given a lot of rights because of that. But I just think about the victims' families, again, because I've interviewed them and I know what they've been through, and they have jobs and they're hardworking people, and they already have to think about taking a lot of time off work when this happened. And even for the hearings now, they have to figure out their vacation days, and they're gonna have to take 3 months off work if they want to attend the entire trial, plus having to go defense is suggesting Boise, Idaho, which is like the biggest city in the state. But that's not anywhere near Moscow, Idaho, and they have to rent a house probably. I saw this happen with Lori Vallow's trial too. The victim's family, grandparents had to do that. Does that come into play, or is it just all about the legal side?
I think it should be all about the legal side. I mean, I feel for the families. I think it's horrible to have to go through all of this again, to hear the evidence. They're going to hear things that are very disturbing. They're going to see physical evidence that's awful. I mean, so this is going to be really hard on the families, and it makes it that much harder to have to travel and have to stay somewhere else.
Like,
and you're
how is that
right.
fair to them?
The right to a fair trial, it trumps that, because this man is going to be put to death if he is found guilty.
Yeah.
And when
fair.
you're dealing with a capital case like this, you have to make sure that all of his constitutional rights, all his civil rights were protected, so that if he is found guilty and if he gets, and if a jury decides on the capital punishment, that everything was done, he was given a fair trial.
Isn't there something also to be said, though, if you commit a brutal crime in a town or in a city, like, shouldn't you face the consequences and face a jury and the community in that place? When they move it away, like, aren't you, do you know what I mean? Like, isn't that the way our system's supposed to work?
No, our system's supposed to be fair. And it's supposed to be fair that if one, innocent person is convicted, then our system has failed. So it is calculated to protect everyone who is accused. And sometimes that includes guilty people. I'm not saying in this case, I don't know. We're waiting for the trial like everybody else.
Yeah.
That doesn't preclude us, having met families and talked to families and seen the wreckage of these murders, from understanding that this is something we can never even imagine living through, thank goodness. I mean, God forbid. So I just think that you have to understand a legal system, it is to protect the rights of the individual who's charged with a capital crime. And while that may be horrific for families, and think about the O.J. Simpson families, 2 trials. And celebrations, if you recall. I mean, I don't know
It's
if you
just,
do, but
and
it's
I get the law, and you're a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but I've covered the trials, and I know that you have to protect people's rights, and you're innocent until proven guilty. It just does seem like during the process, the defendant's rights seem more important than the victim's sometimes. Do you ever think that?
Well, I think ultimately the victim's rights, if he murdered them, will prevail.
Yeah.
If he did it.
Right.
I believe in the system.
All right, so that's what Allison had to say about it. Again, the hearing is at the end of August, so I will be there to cover it, the change of venue hearing. And it's a big deal, because if they move the case, that's a big deal. If they move it to Boise, Idaho, that's a whole different part of the state. I know that some of the victims' families are concerned about this. You think about them having to plan to take 3 months off for the trial. So that's a sacrifice for them, and they need to know where they're going to do that. They may have to rent houses, and I know many of them want the trial to stay in Latah County. They feel passionate about that's where this can be a fair trial all around. The prosecution seems to be against moving it. We'll have to see what they say at the hearing, and the judge has also pretty much I've had the feeling that he doesn't want to move the case at this point. But again, that's what the big hearing is about at the end of August. I'll be there. I'll be at most of the Kohberger hearings moving forward, so you can count on me. I'll keep you posted on NewsNation. Law&Crime will also cover, and I'll talk to you guys later.